In this video we're going to look at questionnaire preparation. Now some of the material in this video will have been covered in other videos in the course. So there is some overlap, but we make no apology for that. It's all part of the learning process. We'll start with the preliminary concerns. First of all, we need to consider the data collection method, and then we need to consider the measurement scale and statistical analysis that's going to be used. So there are two considerations. One is the data collection method, and secondly the measurement scale and its statistical analysis that will be used to turn the data into information at the later stage. Now, one of the issues to look at is wording. It's important to use correct grammar and sentence structure. Bad grammar or poor grammar is an indication that the questionnaire is not very professional and it hasn't been very well thought out. So that may alienate some of the respondents. Avoid slang and colloquialisms. Slang terms tend to be regional and tend to be very local, and slang is an indication of poor English and poor language skills. Again, not very professional. The wording should be simple, however, and it should not be condescending to the respondent. It should be simple, but not too simple. It should treat the respondent with some sort of dignity, some sort of feeling. The respondent has got a brain and is going to respond to the questions. Make the wording clear, but don't condescend, don't insult the intelligence of the respondent. Use a conversational tone, not too chatty, but at the same time conversational. Wording should be as close as possible to the manner in which people would talk to each other. So it doesn't have to be very formal or very rigid. It just presented in a manner that makes the respondent comfortable. The wording should be neutral and clearly communicate the intent of the question. The wording should not be biased, or certain words should not be emphasized. It should be neutral, just put out as a question and the response recorded accurately. That was the intention, and that's what should happen. Now the instructions, well, instructions how to answer should be communicated to the respondent as part of the question. So don't give a global set of instructions at the start. For a start, that may intimidate the respondent or put the respondent off completely so that they don't participate. Just as each question comes up, it's allowed to say, well, in your own words, what do you think of this? Try to give the directions for each question calmly, slowly, clearly. Special instructions to the interviewer should be clear and located on the questionnaire. So sometimes the interviewer needs to be reminded how to ask a question or what to watch out for in a question. And these may be written on the sheet itself. So the questionnaire sheet may include instructions to the interviewer. Clearly distinguish the instructions to the interviewer questions and responses by always putting instructions to the interviewer in capitals or in italics. Make sure that the interviewer does not start to read instructions aimed at him or her and start to pose these as questions to the respondent. The respondent should respond to the questions that were intended. So it's just a design issue. With the questionnaire paper, make sure the respondent questions are clear, but any special instructions to the interviewer should appear perhaps in italics on the side, in the margin. Just a quick note as to what to watch out for. Now the content, well, always use short questions. Don't use long and complicated questions. Link the questions to the aims and objectives of the study. It should be clear that the questions do link to the objectives of the study. Make sure that the questions are relevant and meaningful. Don't ask arbitrary questions or misleading questions or irrelevant questions. They'll just alienate the respondent. They'll refuse to cooperate. Don't prejudice the respondent or make assumptions. Don't insult the respondent. That's absolutely forbidden. And don't make assumptions about the respondent or about the answer, and perhaps misrecord the answer on the assumption that the respondent did not mean it. If a question contains facts, make sure that they are accurately set out. The facts must be accurate. And make sure the question wording is precise. It focuses in directly on what was required. No more and no less. It is precise to what was intended, what was required, and that is the question. The question is focused. And to do this, you have to use specific and unambiguous questions. Be precise and specific regarding questions relating to time. If you're asking someone about what they felt about something 6 months ago, that might be a problem. That might be an issue. Avoid loaded questions that suggest to the respondent that one answer is preferable to another. This is all part of the wording as well. So make sure that the respondent sees each question as neutral. In other words, there's not a preferred answer, and the respondent is not going to make the interviewer happy by giving one answer as opposed to another. The respondent should give the answer that is intended. That's the real answer, not the one that has been contrived, perhaps by bad wording or by the actions of the interviewer. Avoid double questions where two or more issues are mentioned. Don't ask if the respondent believes that the BBC is informative and entertaining, because it's two questions. The BBC is informative, the BBC is entertaining. Those are two questions. Don't link the two together, because that will lead to an ambiguous response. The respondent, quite rightly, does not know which part he or she is answering. Also, avoid all-inclusive terms such as never and always. Generally speaking, there are always exceptions, if you pardon the pun. There are exceptions to the always. So try to avoid it if possible. If terms like never and always are used, then people may say, well, not always. But what they really meant was, in the vast majority of cases, the answer is yes, but not always. There might be one or two rare examples of something when it's not appropriate. So when you use an always in a question, you might find one set of answers predominates over the other. Avoid the use of technical terms and abbreviations that can be misconstrued. The use of technical terms and abbreviations can be frustrating and annoying. Well known abbreviations, such as BBC, for example, that's quite well known, so that's allowed. But technical terms may not be understood. Asking somebody something technical about a computer, for example, a layperson something technical about a computer, will just intimidate the respondent. Will feel like they're made to feel stupid, when in fact they're not. They're just being intimidated. So to avoid that, avoid technical terms and abbreviations. And also avoid inflammatory words such as racist or exploitation. If you go out and say, do you believe that workers in the fast food industry are being exploited? That's a leading question. The word exploited leads the respondent into a certain way of thinking. Reword it. Get rid of inflammatory language. And make sure that all the questions are relevant to the research goal. Make sure the questions are related to what is being asked. And be certain that all important questions are asked. That's important. All the important questions must be asked. Now, the response categories. Well, the response categories must match the attributes mentioned in the question. And the response categories to closed-ended items must be sufficiently exhaustive. In other words, if it's a closed-ended question, if the answer is yes or no, maybe that's not sufficient. Maybe it should be a don't know. If you're asking someone's opinion about something, perhaps they genuinely don't know, but you're forcing them to give a yes or a no. So it should be exhaustive. In other words, yes, no, don't know. 3 categories, not 2, might be appropriate. The categories must be mutually exclusive. If the categories are overlapping, that'll cause confusion. So a yes and no, these are the opposites. Those are mutually exclusive. It can't be half yes and half no. It's yes, no, or don't know. If you don't know, it's neither a yes nor a no. These are mutually exclusive. Questions which overlap in terms of answers are confusing, and the respondent will get confused and will not know what the answer is, will not know which one to pick. The categories respondents would naturally use to classify the item or themselves. So try to use categories that the respondents would relate to. So categories like yes, no, don't know, or once a week, once a month, once a year, or some sort of category that the respondent would relate to. How often do you go to a restaurant to eat? Once a day, once a week, once a year. What about someone who goes 2 days? Not once a week, but 2 days. Not once a day, once a week. So there's something in between. What about people who go twice? So should it be, I go to the restaurant once a day, I go to the restaurant every 2 days, every 3 days, every 4 days? It gets complicated. So the respondent would need to know exactly what the questions mean, and they need to be sorted out so that the respondents can easily answer those questions. So the questions may contain response category don't know. The problem with don't knows is normally that's an indication that the wording of the question was not very precise. It didn't enable the respondent to answer the question. Or perhaps the wrong respondents were picked, the wrong target population was picked to answer the question. Possible. Now, the order in which questions appear. Well, all the questions must be relevant. As said earlier, all questions must be relevant. Questions may be seen by the respondent to be in a context of questions. Therefore, answers to one question can be affected by responses to other questions in the same group. So it's important at the pilot stage or at the pre-test stage to work out what questions are related to each other, group the questions, and make sure it's a logical progression, that the respondent can go through those questions logically. So if the respondent answered yes to question 1, then it would also be logical to answer yes to question 2, perhaps. The question should be grouped according to topics. They should be related to the topic under consideration. They should not be all over the place. They should not be mixed up. They should be related to the topics. And within a topic, it's usually best to arrange questions so that they move from the general to the specific. Do you believe that all schools are doing a good job in teaching children? All schools. And then you can move to the specific. In the context of this school, do you believe? And pose the question, whatever the question is. So you're going from the general to the specific. The question order should permit the interviewer to keep the interview moving at a conversational yet purposeful pace. And to achieve this, order the questions using a logic that will make sense to the respondent. And use transitional statements freely so that the questions flow easily from one to the next. It doesn't become a conversation, but at the same time, it's almost a conversation. So do you believe that all schools are doing a good job in educating children? Yes, no, or don't know. And the person says, don't know. And say, okay, well, following on from that, I'm going to now ask you about some specific school. Do you believe that this school is doing a good job in respect of, and pose the question. There has been transitional statements. It's conversational. It's moving the person easily from one question to the next. That's a matter of training for the interviewers, the field workers. They must be trained so as to enable them to move from one question smoothly to the next. The first questions should be relatively easy to answer, that are related to the research topic that was expressed in the introductory message or the cover letter. So the introductory message telling the person what the whole exercise is going to be about, the first set of questions should be easy and related to that. So quite gentle, straightforward questions. And it puts the respondent at ease, makes the respondent relax. It's not going to be a bad experience. It's quite a pleasant experience just answering some straightforward questions. Later on, more detailed questions can be introduced. And place the important or sensitive questions in the middle of the questionnaire so that easier questions can be posed towards the end and leaving the respondent with a good feeling about the whole exercise. It was quite straightforward. In fact, the important or the sensitive questions were dealt with in the middle. And, as I said, place easy to answer questions such as demographic questions, age, job, career, whatever it is. Easy questions. Plus, place those at the end of the questionnaire, leaving the respondent quite happy with the whole exercise and feeling that they've contributed something. But really the detailed questions, the important questions, have come in the centre. Now the format, well, clearly distinguish questions from response categories. The categories are the broad areas that need to be questioned, and the questions must clarify those broad areas. The questions must relate to the broad areas. Vary the response patterns and group topics as often as is practical to prevent fatigue. So vary the topics if possible to try and make sure that the respondent is stimulated by the questions, not finding it boring or monotonous or challenging. So just lighten it if possible by introducing some variation in the questions or in the type of questions or in the way the questions are presented. Try to vary it if possible. Not always the case, but if it is, try to do so. Avoid breaking a question between pages of the questionnaire. It looks very unprofessional. If the field worker is reading a question and has to turn the page to find the rest of the question, it's not professional. It means that the pretest was not very well done. Perhaps there was no pretest done. But don't split the question between pages. It doesn't look good. Splitting complex issues into two or more simple questions in order to eliminate respondent confusion and error. That's worth doing. If the issue is complex, perhaps a single question will not get the answer. Perhaps it might require 2 or even 3 questions, or maybe more, to get the answer, to get different perspectives, different feelings about the issue. So it could be explored perhaps in different ways. So complex issues can be asked, could require, I should say, a different set of questions, a whole set of questions dedicated to itself, which all give a different perspective on the issue. Avoid questions that duplicate earlier items or appear to be to the respondent to be redundant. That's important. It's important to avoid duplication, because the respondent's going to say, well, I've answered that earlier. Why are you asking me again? So that's important. Finally, pre-code the questionnaire, including the response codes on the questionnaire. So the questionnaire is pre-coded and ready for analysis quickly. That makes the subsequent work easier. Now, let's move to pretest. Conduct a small-scale replica of the large-scale survey. That's all the pretest is. It's a small-scale replica of the large-scale survey. It's a small-scale test. So if the final survey is to be 50, let's say, respondents, the small-scale one could be 5 or 6. And out of these 5 or 6, any issues that were thrown up in delivering the questionnaire could be recorded and integrated and changes made accordingly. Let's just run through the steps for this. Step 1. Administer the questionnaire to representative respondent on a personal interview. So what we'll do here is we're talking here about a personal interview, an interview of, say, 1-to-1, and a pretest, would be looking at a small group and administering the questionnaire to the small group to get responses. Administer the revised questionnaire on a small scale using the same medium as the final administration. So, having had step 1, done a small scale test, taking the feedback from the test and making changes to the questionnaire or to the interview questions or whatever it is, do it again. Then, with those changes built in, perform a small scale test again to see if better results are found. And then enter the data into a spreadsheet or statistical package and tally the results to see what how the analysis can be conducted later. So it's testing out the final stage, looking at how the analysis can be done. And construct a summary survey, a tally of response frequencies recorded on a copy of the questionnaire. So all the processes of conducting the final survey are being conducted in the pretest. The wording of the questions, the sequence of the questions, the style of delivery, and it's all been done on a small scale. Feedback is then incorporated into refining the final document, but it also can be pre-tested. And then the data itself is entered onto a spreadsheet or into a statistical package to see how it can be analysed in the end, and if the questions are logical and if it can be done smoothly at the end. And a summary survey is worked out, a tally of the response frequencies recorded on a copy of the questionnaire. Step 5. Revise the questionnaire and repeat the pretest as needed. So ideally it's not one pretest, it's several pretests until all of the issues are sorted out. At that stage it's ready to go to the full survey. So each of these pretests might be only 5 or 6 respondents giving feedback. But when finally it's all been sorted out and it's ready, then it could be delivered to the sample selected, which might be 50 or 60 or 100 or whatever it is, respondents. Now, the pretest issues, well, look for variability in the responses. If the majority answer all or none, then the question may need altering. So if a lot of people are saying, if it's yes, no, don't know, and they're all saying don't know, there's just something wrong with the question. Because lots of people are saying don't know as a response. It might be necessary to go back to the wording of the question and change the wording so that there's more variability in the responses. There are also non-substantive responses. Non-substantive responses could be of the form I don't know or refusal to answer. Now keep these at a minimum. And these could be the product of bad wording of the questions. The questions are confusing, so they don't know what the answer is. There could be bad wording difficulties. For example, bad grammar or incomprehensible slang. These need to be sorted out and taken out at the pre-testing stage. The respondent may not ask the interviewer to explain or rephrase the question. So the respondent may hear the question, may partially understand the question, but really would like more explanation before he or she can answer it. Now, is there a facility for the respondent to do that? And if the respondent does it mean that the interviewer, the field worker, has got the training necessary to give the supplementary information without leading the respondent, without biasing the respondent? And that's where some notes in the margin might be useful for each question. If more information is sought, prompt as follows. The interviewer expresses no or minimal difficulty in administering the question. So it could be that the interviewers are fine about the questions and don't consider them to be any issues in administering the questions. It's two parts: making sure that the interviewer can ask the questions clearly, and making sure that the respondent can understand the questions. It's a communications issue. There is a sender and a receiver, and the receiver, the respondent, must be able to understand the question clearly and give an answer to the question. And make sure that there are no difficulties entering or tallying the data. So the pre-testing situation should also look at the final analysis stage and making sure that the data collected can be analysed and can be analysed efficiently. In other words, the questions are logical and the questions can be coded in a straightforward manner. So pre-testing is extremely important. So that's all I'm going to do on this lot. So that concludes this talk on questionnaire preparation. Thank you for watching.